This workshop is part of a series of mindscape activities that connects people to nature through art. Mindscape is a Wye Valley area of outstanding natural beauty and Artspace Synderford project. It's part of the Foresters Forest, the National Lottery Heritage Fund and the Landscape Partnership Programme. Each of the YouTube clips is accompanied by a step-by-step activity guide that you can download from the Artspace Synderford website. Hello and welcome to the Mindscape Activities workshops. For this session we're going to make our very own 21st century fossil. Now here's an example that we've produced previously. It's basically a found object that's been impressed into clay to create a mould, and then we pour Plaster of Paris and it creates this really effective, really quite realistic fossil impression. Here's an example of a fossil that I found in the forest. I'm not sure if the camera can pick up on it, but here's a rather large fern leaf, and I'm trying to achieve the look of this randomly shaped block of stone, essentially, with the natural object rising out of it. With the examples that I've done previously, I've stained the dried plaster block with just weak tea or weak coffee, and that obviously stains the white plaster and gives it a much more natural appearance, but also just collects in all the little nooks and crannies to accentuate any detail that you might have. So the materials we're going to use for this activity include some standard clay. You might use something like an air dry clay, and I've got a small block of wood to roll out a slab. I've got some Plaster of Paris that I've got from a local educational suppliers, along with a few natural objects that I'm going to use to impress into the clay. You will need a small jug and some sort of measuring device to mix up your plaster. But what I would recommend you do first of all is just test out which objects make a nice impression into the surface of the clay. You might have a collection, like I have, of natural objects and found objects. I've got a clothes peg, a Lego man, but I've also got a pine cone, move these, a leaf from a potato that I'm growing out in the garden, something like a feather, a couple of shells, maybe even this old toy wheel or something. So take your object and gently impress it into the surface of the clay. You may find it's visually more interesting if you put it in at an angle and not just a flat sort of evenly impressed object. It tends to look a bit more realistic, more like a fossil would do. And some of these objects create quite a crisp amount of detail. So be careful when you pull them out. They can be a bit fiddly. You want to be careful that you don't accidentally impress your fingers into the surface of the clay. Let's try some of these objects here. Let's go for the side. And gently tease it out. That's quite nice. What about these shells? Gently take it out. Oh, that is nice. Let's do another shell to complement that. Okay, right. Will the camera pick up on that? So what we have there is a mould. We've impressed the objects to create a concave indent, which we can pour Plaster of Paris into. At the moment, if I poured Plaster of Paris on top of this, it would obviously leak out around the edge. So we need to create some sort of wall, some sort of barrier. what I do want to show you is how fantastic things like leaves turn out. So this potato leaf, if I were to place it, actually I might do it that way, place it on top of the clay and using the rolling pin gently impress it into the clay. Now you'd think such a delicate and thin object wouldn't make much impression at all, but I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. So let's gently tease that out. Oh wow, that does look good. Hopefully the camera can pick up on that. But there's quite a lot of detail in there. So I think I'll use that as my 21st century fossil. What I'm going to do is start to slowly turn up the edges, and that creates this little wall, this little barrier. It doesn't need to be particularly high, at least I would say 1.5 centimetres, maybe 2 centimetres, just so that when you do pour in your plaster of Paris, you don't have a low point anywhere where it floods out. Okay. So I'm going to mix the plaster of Paris now. Make sure you read the instructions obviously when you buy yours. For this particular brand it's going to be 3 parts plaster to 2 parts water, and depending on how many moulds you create in one session you'll need to think about how much you actually make. But one word of warning is when you are mixing this, it takes quite a while to set, and the idea is you are mixing it until you get the consistency of single cream, but there will become a point where it does start to set, and it does that fairly quickly. So you would need to have all your moulds ready in a line so that you can start pouring the plaster of Paris in before it's set. Okay, so I'll mix this up and get a batch ready. Right, so I've just mixed up a bit of the plaster of Paris, just giving it a bit of a stir, and can you see that? About the consistency, as I say, of single cream. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is gently pour this plaster into my mould, hoping that I've created a high enough wall around the outside. Slightly raise that. So I've got roughly about 1 centimetre, could be a little bit thicker, of plaster. Now that doesn't take very long to dry. You're probably looking at about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on your room temperature, when you'll be able to gently peel the clay off of the semi-dried plaster. It'll take a few days to completely dry. When it does, you'll know, because you'll get that very sort of like high-pitched tinny kind of noise. But if you're really itching to have a look, it shouldn't be too long until you can do that.